Salams from the People's Dispatch studios here in New Delhi. I'm Siddhantani and you're watching this weekend show of the Daily Debrief, where we have a special focus on what is happening towards the end of the first week of negotiations at COP27 and other stories, of course. First up, developing nations have taken a vocal stand at COP27 in a chaotic first week of the world's biggest conference on tackling the impact of human-induced climate change. After all that, US President Joe Biden said on Friday, I quote, if we are to win this fight, every major emitting nation needs to align with 1.5-degree targets, end quote. He's referring, of course, to the 2015 Paris Agreement. India, meanwhile, made a strong statement on technology and will also release its long-term low emissions and development strategies next week. But while there's been a lot of talk, very little so far is being heard of concrete decisions. Prashant is in studio now to talk us through some of the major talking points as we approach the end of week one of the two-week summit. Prashant, the question in what I was saying earlier, what are the major talking points or the major points being made by these developing countries who so far spoken at COP27?
Right. So, I mean, as we've talked about in the same show a couple of days ago, this is the technical round of talks. The political discussions where, some of the more concrete aspects are going to probably come out in the next week as well. So we'll have more clarity then. But I think some trends are already very clearly very visible. Point number one is the fact that among the developing countries, there is even more conviction that loss and damage, a term which is now becoming quite popular, should be very much on the agenda. What does this mean? Now, this means basically that money be provided for dealing with the impact of climate disasters right now. This includes flooding, extreme weather events, starvation, all those various kinds of issues. Yeah. So this has become a very central aspect of the discussions that are going on right now. We know that the global countries of the global north last year resisted commitments on it. This year also probably it is likely that we might move towards a place where there is a general agreement on the need for a fund, but no concrete details are finalized yet. That is one possibility. So a lot depends on the major negotiations that happen next week. Right. Secondly, there is also discussions that are going on, for instance, on replacing the $100 billion annual fund, which is supposed to be given by the rich countries, which they did not, into a more sustainable, into a different kind of funding model. But again, all of that again is going to be settled only in the next 2 to 3 years. Now, amid this, we've had an avalanche of information which shows that commitments have not been met by the rich countries, which shows that a lot of financing for climate-related, issues has been in the form of debt or has been in the form of insurance mechanisms, right, which is not what countries are asking for. They're asking for direct grant-based funding. We also are, important leaders to the global south, Nicolas Maduro, Gustavo Petro, Mia Mottley from Barbados, all of them, many of them pointing out various aspects of the hypocrisy of the capitalist system when it comes to climate change and global warming. For instance, Mia Mottley making a very valid point that fossil fuel companies which earn 200 billion how much are they contributing? In fact, if you look at COP27, the percentage of fossil fuel lobbies has actually increased from COP26. Right. So there are thousands of fossil fuel lobbies, wandering around the halls trying to push their agenda in various kinds of ways. And this has actually led to a lot of anger among activists. I believe today is a day when we're going to see quite a few protests also. By the time the show comes out, many of these protests will have taken place. So all this together, I think what we're seeing is on the one side, developing countries pushing for one concrete funding of a particular kind. Two, pushing for a clearer recognition of the historical role that some countries have played in contributing to climate change and funding based on that. Right. Whereas if you look, for instance, at Biden's speech, there is, the target of 1.5 degrees is mentioned. There is 1.5 degrees in increase in temperature from pre-industrial levels. But he makes it sound like an equity. Everyone must come together. And this is an issue which I think you need to sort of decode that. Yes, everyone must come together. But the question of responsibility is also very important. Who has been responsible for the bulk of it? Does, say, the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the US come together just like that? Or do they have very different contributions to this crisis? Right. So that remains a very central point in these discussions.
And so, like you were pointing out, one is the hypocrisy and the other is the political aspect of negotiations. What do you expect from the next week, given that also at the same time G20 is on the card, so many political leaders, as well as attention, not of the leadership, but also of the media, will shift to that event.
Right. So, I mean, usually what happens is, like COP26, we saw the same thing. There are a host of proposals. There, it boils down to the last minute. Sometimes extensions take place. The final verdict, the final agreement is like everyone welcomes the final agreement. But if you read to the details, you will find that there is not enough being done. For instance, reports. If you look at the reports of how promises made in COP26 have fared, they haven't been very good.
Yeah.
In fact, 2021, I think methane emissions were at an all-time high, I believe, which is a very dangerous thing because while methane lasts in the atmosphere for lesser amount of time than carbon dioxide, its impact is very dangerous. Now, there's a lot of focus on the European countries are trying to move to natural gas as their transition fuel, so to speak. But natural gas, the process of using and processing natural gas also leads to methane emissions. So this is something they're being very silent about. In fact, Joe Biden yesterday has announced a deal whereby Egypt will export its natural gas to Europe and then will get support for renewable energy. So, there's a bit of strategic play here so that Europe's energy needs are being taken care of. And the question is, why does Europe have energy needs? Because they impose these sanctions on Russia and all that. So, so very difficult right now to predict. But I think one thing we need to all remember, I think, is that the reports now, all the reports show that the target of this 1.5 degrees, we are absolutely not in a position to meet them. In fact, we're looking at an increase around 2.5 degrees by the end of the century, which could mean the
catastrophic.
More than catastrophe. I think it's like large parts of human civilization itself will be completely destroyed. There will be massive migration. So many species across the world are definitely going to go extinct. Food is going to become scarce. So we have a multitude of crises we are staring at, and these are the conferences where the decisions have to be made.
And the North needs to understand and accept that the impact of it will also be felt, irrespective of how much they might be able to stave it off.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks, Prashant, for that update. We'll ask you to stick around because we want your inputs on the next story as well, which is, of course, that Twitter has fired over 7,500 employees since the company was taken over by Elon Musk. That includes 90% of all employees in India. At almost the same time, Meta, which is the parent company, of course, of social media platforms Facebook and Instagram, announced 11,000 job cuts. Mark Zuckerberg, the boss of that company, once again said he miscalculated on the amount of money that would come into the company as the COVID-19 pandemic eased. And he's, of course, especially sorry to those impacted. Presumably, he's referring there to those staffers who've been fired. When the announcement was made, Meta stock climbed by over 5 percentage points, leaving Zuckerberg that much richer than the previous day. Musk, meanwhile, has put the blame for Twitter's death spiral on activists and said that the pressure they put on advertisers is leading to the fall in revenue and that they were destroying free speech in America. In the midst of all of this, hopefully Prashant can give us an indication of what it means for the tech industry and where technology overall might be headed.
It's quite entertaining, actually. I mean, it's like watching a dumpster fire, as they say, because especially Twitter, because we all have our reservations about Twitter. Let's be very clear about it. Twitter has served as an arm of the US foreign policy establishment in various ways, a tool for spreading a particular kind of ideology. But what Elon Musk is doing now is, it's quite frankly quite unbelievable in some senses, because what he's there's been such complete confusion and such complete chaos that the brand value that Twitter has obtained over all these years is completely being destroyed. And we do know that advertisers are now very reluctant. Many advertisers are now reluctant to even advertise on Twitter, and this is important because about 90% of Twitter's revenue comes from advertising.
Right.
Now, Elon Musk says that he plans to sell this Twitter Blue service where you get a blue tick to people, and that is how he'll make money. But that's not a sustainable way of making money. And he's been rolling out stuff. He's been postponing them. Now, yesterday Twitter suspended this blue tick option. There's been a huge proliferation of fake accounts and parody accounts. One very funny instance of a major pharmaceutical company, a fake account of a pharmaceutical company tweeting that insulin would be free, and that company's stocks crashed after that. Now, the important thing to note here is that should have been the real account tweeting that insulin should be free. Why insulin is being charged at this point, 100 years after its creation, is a different matter. But it is creating complete havoc in if as far as Twitter is concerned, there are concerns of cases being filed by government agencies. There are concerns of advertisers withdrawing. There are concerns of misinformation, fake news, everything. So basically, it's become it's basically people have been asking questions as to whether we are seeing this company basically implode or self-destruct,
Right.
because that is how chaotic it has been. So very fascinating to see. It's interesting to think of many users have migrated to other platforms, which are far more, open source based or freer in various senses, pay more respect to users' data. Mastodon being a very good example of that. So I think it's a bit too early to say whether this is going to lead to a radical, especially Twitter's, meltdown is going to lead to a radical restructuring of big tech. Unlikely,
Yeah.
but it definitely marks a moment in terms of how big tech is, generally structured. Because we also, like you said, say Facebook is also going through a very difficult time. And this is because Mark Zuckerberg is obsessed with this vision of the metaverse, as they say, virtual reality. And he's put all his bets on that. And this is not very popular. So, in fact, while you mentioned that his net value rose one day, but it's actually been falling consistently because the fact that Facebook stock value has been decreasing. So, all this put together, Facebook and Twitter, I think, are just two examples, two very prominent examples, because the fact that they're so well known and all that. But generally, think we are seeing big tech is going through a series of difficult times, and it will be very interesting to watch. Also, very interesting because the fact that big tech itself is so intertwined in our day-to-day lives, not
Absolutely.
only at an individual or social level, but also at a strategic level, at a political level, which is very important. These companies have become, in some senses, so essential to political work, political activity, the formation of politics across the world.
Yeah.
And they have almost become gatekeepers. And they have actually structured and restructured the democratic process without anybody's consultation, without any sense of cautiousness of the impact they're having.
Right.
And they have behaved like they had some kind of divine right to decide how communication, how people's lives should be organized. And we had many examples of this. So I think the vulnerability of these companies also kind of shows us how, in a strange way, shows us how completely unqualified they are to serve as these kind of gatekeepers. Because these are not public companies in essence. These are not companies where the public has any participation. But they have assumed those roles purely out of money and hubris. So I think it's a very interesting meltdown to watch.
All right. Thanks very much for that update, Prashant, and good to have you in studio as always. And finally, a federal judge in Texas on Thursday ruled that President Joe Biden's plan to cancel hundreds of billions of dollars in student loan debt was unlawful and must be vacated, delivering a victory to conservative opponents of the program. The ruling was made by U.S. District Judge Mark Pittman, an appointee of former Republican President Donald Trump in Fort Worth. He called the program an unconstitutional exercise of Congress's legislative powers. Anish of People Dispatch spoke to me earlier via video conference for more on this story. Anish, another day, another story for you on Daily Debrief. Tell us first, what was the foundation for the ruling from this U.S. federal court?
Well, let's begin with the lawsuit itself, because the manner in which it was orchestrated itself has political, if not, it's not really undertones. It's just like very overtly political standpoints to begin with. So it was orchestrated by this group called as Job Creators Network, based in Texas. It's a very conservative organization which has opposed student loan forgiveness. Now, one of the reasons, the way they have orchestrated this lawsuit was by roping in two students, both of whom were not qualified. At least one was not qualified entirely for any kind of student loan forgiveness. The other was only qualified for a partial loan waiver because of his income category at the time at the time of the disbursement of the loan. So these two students were the ones who were used as parties with a standing. Standing is somebody who has a stake in the matter, who has undergone some kind of legal injury. And this is what they tried to do with these students. The arguments that the students presented were at some level valid. There's a kernel of truth, because obviously one of them did not qualify primarily because they were his their loan was taken from a commercial lender, and the other did not qualify for a heightened or a hiked student loan waiver of $20,000 because his income level at the time of the disbursement of the student loan was higher than what it is now, which means and he so the both the students are arguing for the fact that they should people like them should have been uh, considered or taken advice from, or should have been part of the discourse of the student loan waivers. Now, this is something that progressive groups have been talking about all the time. And even when the student loan waiver, which is a $400 billion program for a crisis that is about $1.75 trillion crisis, and which barely impacts major, some of the most needy groups, especially those who have to deal with private and commercial lenders who are not part of any of the federal programs. They are the ones who have often complained about the fact that they were excluded. Now, this is definitely coming back to haunt the Biden administration. But at the same time, we need to remember that the judge's order was also tenuous, to say at the very least, because the judge did not consider the fact that whether or not the students were, uh, underwent any kind of legal injury because of the program, because of the exclusion that they claim to have happened. And secondly, the order being, to bring down the entire student loan program, the forgiveness program, based on the fact that the Congress was not consulted when the program and the aid program was very explicitly part of an emergency scheme, is something that the judge did not consider, and many legal experts have talked about how the judge's legal reasoning is tenuous and often comes from a very political, because he is a Trump appointee, a Trump era appointee, a conservative, a very clear conservative person. So definitely that has an impact. That has had an impact in the order that he.
All right. Quickly, if you can, Anish, because we're running out of time, this sort of legal wrangling will, of course, mean that uh, students will not be able to benefit from any of these programs in the near future, of course. And the numbers that you're indicating truly boggle the mind of how widespread student debt is in the United States. What can we expect next in terms of how this fight will continue?
So obviously, the Biden administration will try to appeal. It will go to the New Orleans Circuit of Appeal, and that is also a conservative-dominated, with many Trump appointees in their ranks. So definitely, we do not know if the appeals process will actually have any success, and that can take anywhere between weeks to months. The student loan payments need to begin from January, because that is when they have this sort of moratorium that was afforded to them during the COVID-19 pandemic, and a whole set of relief measures that were rolled out under the Biden administration at the time. So there will be no relief program. There will also be no debt forgiveness program happening right now. Applications for debt waivers has stopped, which means until January there is nothing is going to happen if courts do not decide on it quick. And the manner in which the courts have been populated by conservatives, we do not know if any kind of relief will be forthcoming anytime soon to make any sort of timely impact on the people who are reeling under massive student debt.
Right. Of course, coupled with the inflation situation and wider economic crisis in America, the situation that much more desperate, actually, no other word for it, for tens of thousands of students there. Thanks very much for the update, Anish. Right, that does it for the Daily Debrief team for this week. As always, we invite you to head to our website, peoplesdispatch.org, for all of these stories and the rest of the work we do. And of course, Please give us a follow on the social media platform of your choice. We'll be back next week with more Daily Debrief. Until then, stay safe. Goodbye.